So welcome to Conversations with Melissa, our special Father's Day 2023 edition. Let me thank RenaFi, my host. RenaFi provides research-backed practical education. At RenaFi, we teach about the underlying drivers of our behavior, and that knowledge leads to better decisions, and better decisions lead to an improved quality of life. Visit renafi.com. That's RenaFi, F as in Frank, I.com. Thank you, my guests, Dr. Larry Jones and Rick Webster, my two favorite ADHD dads, for being here. And there are so many people who you'll find out, I got ADHD from my kids, right? The teacher said, hey, we should test the kid. We tested the kid. I'm watching the test and they're talking about me, right? So I know that it seems a little silly, but in the order that discovery happens.
We need to not prejudge. I don't know. I had a great mom, but I do remember when I was about 5 years old, she bristled, and I know the person was talking about ADHD or something to that effect, and she really bristled. There's nothing wrong with him. He just needs to go out and play. He's just being a boy and stuff. So I think I get that. That was like 60 something years ago, right? But as parents, we need to, put some of our preconceived notions aside long enough to hear what the medical community is telling us, and that otherwise we're doing a disservice to our children.
In fact, there's a passage in my book, Falling Through the Ceiling, where we actually give advice to parents. Since I was a pediatrician and saw these kids, and the work was not only the children, but the parents, to try to make sure that the parents understood really what was going on with the child. And one of the things that I advise in the book, if the teacher tells you your child may have ADHD and to go check with the physician tells you, and or multiple teachers tell you, how many people do you need to tell you before you begin to act on it? My advice is it should only take two at best. If two people tell you that are separate or seeing your child in different environments suggests that the child needs to be evaluated, there's nothing wrong in getting the child evaluated rather than being defensive, because it is all for the child. You want the best for your children. So, and most insurances will cover that testing. Almost every healthcare insurance, Medicare, Medicaid also covers it. Maybe a little more difficult and challenging to find a practitioner to do it, but it is a covered benefit.
There was a little note in the chat that came up to hosts and panelists around Medicare requires an MD to prescribe. So even if they saw you went to your office and the nurse practitioner was well versed in it, the MD is the one who must make the order. Did you have moments where you thought the ADHD impacted your parenting or impacted, I'm going to leave it like that. Did it have that moment? Was a moment like that?
I didn't think so, but my wife did.
Yeah.
In fact, to that point, you should bring that up. Let me just read a little quote from the book. One chapter in the book called Nothing is Normal. When they were little, minor incidents mounted. As our sons grew, there was always something going on to keep us off balance. We were always teetering because of the effect of unexpected behaviors within our family. Before knowing we had ADD, we never had a holiday without incidents. Something always tipped the apple cart. Every time we thought we had effectively dodged a bullet, something bigger happened. As the boys got older, the stakes got higher. We also responded quite differently. Larry, that is me, felt overwhelmed, saying ADHD is like riding a constant roller coaster in the way behaviors affect those in the household. For us, having 4 people affected kept the whole house teetering. All things continued to be chaotic. Audrey, the only non-ADD person in the house, continued to inflate the bubble, saying, Larry, you should have done this, you should have done that. When she criticized the moves I made to provide discipline, structure, and normalcy in our home, her words fueled my frustration. So it was a constant issue. Now, my recollection was a little bit different. I thought I was being the great disciplinarian. I helped with homework, gave all the baths when I came home in the evening. But it's all in the eyes of the individual.
Yes, this perspective, I'm married to an ADHDer, and sometimes when we're in the car together, he drives. Whenever we're together, he's driving, unless there's some strange thing like he got his eyes dilated, right? And so sometimes he's driving a little fast. So he can tell when that is. And so we have a conversation where he'll say, it's safe, I'm driving safe. And this is my perception. I feel unsafe. You can't litigate someone's feelings. Their perception, of course, you can't, it's valid. That's how they see it. But yes, the idea of the non-ADHD spouse has a whole other perspective. What were you going to say, Rick? I'm so sorry.
Well, I was going to answer that question a bit too. My ex-wife, she had 4 daughters, but she believed she had 5 kids in the house. That's just how it worked. But so I think it actually made me the ADHD. I think it made me a better parent, especially after I had realized what the problems were and such. And even though we had this massive meltdown, I actually believe in some way there was some trauma too, but it actually showed my kids that, you don't just collapse into a pile of jello, right? You step up and you deal with stuff, which is what we did, both of us, my wife and I. So I think it made us better role models in some ways. My daughters grew up, could be risky, but they grew up having basically no fear. They grew up knowing that they could do anything they wanted to do as long as they worked hard for it. So I think that's a positive thing. And if we hadn't struggled, I don't think that they would have learned those things nearly as much.
Then there's this question in the Q&A tool. It's a little bit long, so I'm just going to read it verbatim. This question is for Dr. Jones. As a former elementary school teacher, we weren't allowed to say, in quotes, we think your child may have ADHD. And you might want to see the pediatrician. If a teacher used the language ADHD, the school would be obligated to pay for the testing. As a teacher, it was suggested to us concerning behavior about your child. So I'm wondering if you see anything like what I'm seeing at home. If you do, perhaps you'd want to discuss this with your pediatrician. Do you have parents? Did you have parents coming to you where maybe teachers needed to tiptoe around it, where parents would say the teacher isn't saying it outright, but the report card says, I don't know, messy handwriting and looking out the window? Did you have parents come to you with?
Just to sort of put the time period in perspective, I practiced pediatrics from 1981 to 2005. At that time, those restrictions were not in place, in the sense that if the teacher thought that the child had ADHD, they were suggested. I think they were reasonable in terms of trying to feel out the parent in terms of whether that would work or not. But it was not, they were not in any way hindered from saying it. Many didn't say it and were very suggestive in terms of perhaps the child needs to see a pediatrician, and they would describe the features, saying the child has difficulty staying in his seat. I see that little Johnny is constantly looking out of the window and doesn't seem to be focusing on what's going on in the classroom. In fact, the way I usually explain to parents, think of yourself as being in the classroom and you're only there half the time.
Mm-hmm.
So how well do you expect Johnny to do in his classes?
Yeah, I actually want to say something about that real quick. Yeah. And it's just, I know there's lots of different possible solutions to this, but I really think something needs to happen between boys and girls, in that maybe boys should start school a year later. They are developed, their brain, their executive function especially, develops later than with girls. And so we see the extrapolation of that now. I mean, in a university, you're going to find probably 60% girls in that school, and boys are failing in a lot of ways. Because in high school, which is so crucial, they're not fully ready to go yet. And so they get really poor grades and they don't end up in, in good schools. So yeah, I think that's a big issue between boys and girls. I think girls have a significant advantage. And it's great that they're doing what they're doing, but I think maybe a better way to look at it, boys are disadvantaged by our system in a way.
Mm.
And I would agree with that as well. I just don't know if, looking at our society as it's structured, I don't see that as a route that would occur.
Right.
In the sense that before we got into this anti-move that we're in now, we were talking about essentially equality of the sexes and the ability of boys and girls to do very similar things, but assuming that there were separate teams for the most part. I don't think as a society that we're at the point where we would look at it objectively. Physiologically, I agree with you in the sense that boys clearly mature later. There's no question in my mind, having raised 3 sons. And the fact that girls are much more compliant or attempt to please much more readily than do boys is another big factor that leads to the fact that girls tend to be more successful when you look at them, even girls with ADHD. So there's a number of factors there, but theoretically, you're probably correct. I would agree with you, but I just don't see that as a move that our society would be willing to take.
Yeah, I don't suggest it as something that I think has a prayer of happening. I just think there's a clear problem